You may not know this, but nitric oxide is one of the most important molecules in human health. Are you doing everything you can to optimize it? On episode 707 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Nathan Bryan and discuss his book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, bringing the science to life. Welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, the largest and longest running health and fitness podcast dedicated to people over 40. Whether you're looking to lose weight, get stronger, or improve your health and age better, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Coach Allan, an online health and fitness coach and author of The Wellness Roadmap. Each week, we dive into practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and fitness. If you're ready to look, feel, and perform your best, no matter your age, this podcast is the perfect place to start. Let's get you on the path to a healthier, fitter, and more energetic version of yourself. I hope you'll join us each week, and together we can unlock your full potential. Hello, and welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness podcast. I'm really glad you're here. We've got a pretty good conversation going on today. We're going to talk to Dr. Nathan about nitric oxide, and it's a very fascinating conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it. You know, as I'm going into the fall, I'm like, they're starting to get really, really busy. I don't know about you, but just a lot of things are falling in place to keep me moving. So here I am. I'm still in North Carolina, but just trying to get all this done as quickly as I can because, like I said, I've got a lot of other things that are coming up that I need to be ready for. So it's going to be a very busy fall. That's all I can say. So just stay tuned and you'll see what's going on. If you want to know a little bit more, be a little bit more engaged with what's going on here, you should check out our Facebook group. You can go to 40plusfitness.com/group, and that'll take you to the Facebook group. It's a great place. I share a lot of information there. You know, we're only doing this podcast once a week, so a lot of things go and happen during the week that you might not hear here on next Tuesday. So if you want to stay in touch with what's going on at 40 Plus Fitness, you should go check it out, 40plusfitness.com/group. Our guest today is a rare biomedical scientist of nitric oxide who is committed to sharing with us how best to get this molecule through food, diet, and nutrition, as well as pure molecule in the form of a medicine. His seminal discoveries in the field of nitric oxide have resulted in several dozen issued U.S. and international patents. His book chronicles a lifetime of work on nitric oxide and how he has been able to see what others have seen, but think what no one else has thought. With no further ado, here's Dr. Nathan Bryan. Dr. Bryan, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Alan, thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you.
So today we're going to talk about your book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide or Nitric Oxide. I've always known that this was kind of an important part of health, obviously as a man, for obvious reasons, and we'll get into that. But also just knowing that this is part of the whole process of keeping our cardiovascular system healthy. And so I think this is actually a really good book for anyone that's concerned about cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, ED, and wants to know that they're doing what they need to do to be as healthy as they can be.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a very strong bias, by the way. But no, I think
you do, because you kind of sell this stuff. Yeah, my Amazon order arrived about an hour ago.
Awesome, great timing.
Because I am going to check it out. I'm not going to say you completely convinced me, but you gave me a reason to think about a few things, and I'm gonna start exploring a little bit more.
Good.
So let's kind of just jump into this. Okay, what is this nitric oxide, and why does it matter?
Yeah, nitric oxide is a gas. It's a naturally produced gas. It's one of the few gaseous signaling molecules in the human body. It's known to be produced in the lining of the blood vessels. It regulates blood flow, circulation, oxygenation of hemoglobin, oxygen delivery. prevent plaques from depositing in the lining of the blood vessel. And so really it's the most cardioprotective and really cytoprotective molecule that the human body makes. And today we understand that it does a lot more than just dilate blood vessels. It mitigates inflammation, it mobilizes stem cells, prevents our telomeres from shortening, and activates mitochondria energy production. So everything we know about health, longevity, and optimal performance is dependent upon the body's ability to produce nitric oxide.
Okay. Now, let's just kind of jump in a little bit because you said something in the book that it caught my attention because whenever someone says, "Okay, this is a hormone,"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, I got to wake up," because that's definitely a part of our signaling system throughout the body, not just in any one location. And much like any other hormone, if it's not where it needs to be, that creates problems. And I think most of us are aware of that because one or more hormones in our body is not exactly, because we're over 40, is not exactly where we want it to be, and we feel the effect. So can you explain a little bit about nitric oxide as a hormone and again why that's important?
Well, this was a seminal discovery we published. My group was the first group to publish that nitric oxide is a hormone. It was a 2007 study we published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, so a very prestigious journal. So prior to that, and let me talk a little bit about what nitric oxide is first. So it's a gas, and when it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. Right. So prior to our 2007 study, it was thought that nitric oxide can only have an effect in the cell in which it was produced or a nearby cell. And we call that an autocrine, meaning it acts in the cell in which it was produced, or a paracrine, cell beside the cell, because of its half-life. Right. So we discovered that nitric oxide that's produced in the heart actually protects the liver from injury from ischemic reperfusion. So if you have reduced blood flow to the liver, you develop injury and you see an elevation in liver enzymes. And so what we discovered was the nitric oxide that was produced specifically in the heart was transported somehow to the liver, modified the liver biochemistry, and elicited a cytoprotective phenotype. So it may not be nitric oxide per se because we haven't suddenly changed the physical chemistry and the half-life of nitric oxide. But what we found was a hormone function of nitric oxide, that it binds to the cysteine of glutathione, it's transported through the cardiovascular system, it's oxidized to inorganic nitrite, and both of those confer the hormone effects of nitric oxide. And it's really no different than T4 for thyroid hormone. It's an inactive hormone. It has to be transported, has to be converted to T3 or T2 to activate thyroid signaling and the function of thyroid hormone. So nitric oxide follows that same paradigm. It's a molecule. It's produced in one part of the body, transported to other parts of the body. It signals, it modifies protein structure and function and signals. And we know that if you lose the production of this hormone, that bad things happen. And that really, again, there was several eureka moments in those observations. Number one, nitric oxide is certainly a hormone. I think we checked all the boxes of what a hormone is and what it does. But number two, when you start to develop, or when you start to think about developing rational therapies, this is hormone replacement therapy, what we're doing. And so if you're deficient in testosterone as men, what do? We go get testosterone. They give us the missing molecule, right? Yeah. They don't give us DHEA or pregnenolone or these precursors in hopes our testes can make testosterone out of the precursors. No, everybody would laugh at that. We give that molecule. We can give it transdermally. We can give it intramuscularly. We can give it sub-Q through a troche. So we don't have to give it in our testes. Thank goodness, right? We don't have to get shot.
It's funny you'd say that. There was a show. It was about fantasy football. I forget the name of it right now, but it was a comedy, and the guy was going to go on testosterone, and he kept saying, "Okay, so I just shoot this into the testy," and the doctor's like, "No, don't do that." He's like, "So just right in there." He's like, "No, that's the exact opposite of what you want to do." And he's like, "So like in the testy." It was a funny scene. It was a funny scene, but it was like,
okay.
But
the point here is that all of these protocols and guidelines for physiology and hormone replacement are already well established, right? So what we do, and my challenge is differentiating my technology from all the other yahoos in the market who are giving you precursors and substrates and closing their eyes, crossing their fingers, and hoping your body can make nitric oxide out of it. But that's the underlying problem, right? Your body's lost the ability to utilize a lot of these ingredients found in most supplements to make nitric oxide. It's the underlying basis of their nitric oxide deficiency, their endothelial dysfunction. So once we had that observation, I go, well, if all I have to do is produce nitric oxide, the actual molecule, nitric oxide gas, anywhere inside the body, then how do we do this? And I go, well, I can develop an orally disintegrating tablet that when you put it in your mouth, I can control the amount of nitric oxide that's released, and I can control the amount of time in which we release it. Because that's what we try to do as a biochemist and physiologist. I want to recapitulate what the body normally does. Give the body what it needs, the body does its job. Remove from the body what it doesn't need, the body does its job. And so that's been the basis. And until you can understand how the human body makes nitric oxide and understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it, who have lost the ability to make it, then and only then can you start to develop safe and effective product technology. And all these other companies out there selling so-called nitric oxide products have no idea. And so these products don't work. In fact, they can't work because these companies don't understand the basic biochemistry, enzymology, and physiology of nitric oxide. And it's dangerous, it's disingenuous, and it's doing the entire world a disservice.
Yeah, because this is not a more is better kind of situation anyway. You've got to get the right amount to make it do what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
Now, I'll tell you this. If you're over 40 years old and you go into the emergency room and you tell them you have chest pains, they'll take you straight back. You won't sit in the waiting room. And one of the first things they're going to do is pop a nitroglycerin in your mouth to help if it is an actual heart attack. Fortunately for me, it was not, but they still gave me a nitroglycerin in there. That's following kind of a similar thing, and why that actually with cardiovascular disease, that this is such an important issue.
No, absolutely. And, the mechanism of nitroglycerin is actually what led to the discovery of nitric oxide being produced in the human body naturally. So nitroglycerin are what we call organic nitrates, right? It's 3 nitro groups on a glycerol backbone. And so chemically, that has to be metabolized into nitric oxide gas. And in 1977, Dr. Fred Murad, who won a Nobel Prize for this discovery, discovered that nitroglycerin is metabolized into nitric oxide gas. Nitric oxide binds to an enzyme in the smooth muscle of the coronary arteries, and it causes smooth muscle relaxation. So it dilates the coronary arteries. So if you've got obstructive coronary disease and you've got chest pain, which we call angina, and angina is what we call ischemic pain. It's a pain associated with lack of blood flow to a particular body part. So for people with intermittent claudication with peripheral artery disease, they get leg pain. And that's because they've got an occlusion in the artery, or if they've got venous disease in the veins. And if you've got an obstruction in the coronary arteries and you start to walk upstairs or start to exercise, then you get exertional angina because the coronary arteries can't dilate because they're obstructed and they're no longer responsive. Or they're no longer producing nitric oxide. They're always responsive to nitric oxide. They've just lost the ability to produce it. So when you give nitroglycerin, if it's obstructive coronary disease or ischemic heart disease, then the patient will feel immediate symptomatic relief because it's dilating the coronary arteries and the pain goes away, the angina goes away. So it's not only a treatment, but it's a diagnostic tool for ischemia or poor perfusion to the heart. And so that was the discovery that led other scientists to understand, okay, if we give nitroglycerin, it's metabolized into nitric oxide, dilates the blood vessels. And then it was Bob Furchgott in 1980 who discovered that our endothelial cells produces something that causes that same vasodilation. And he called that endothelium-derived relaxing factor. And then 7 years later, Louis Ignarro discovered that it's nitric oxide. So those 3 scientists, for their independent discoveries, were awarded a Nobel Prize in 1998 for the discovery of nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. So all of this, centuries of work and observations led to what we now know is a very important signaling molecule, nitric oxide.
Okay. Now, it also has some effect on high blood pressure. Can you describe that?
Sure. So the blood vessels are meant to be soft and compliant, right? So they're reactive that with each heartbeat, so every time our heart beats, it sends a pulse wave of blood down our entire vascular tree. And if the blood vessels are soft and compliant, it dampens that pulse wave. If your arteries are stiff and rigid, then that pulse wave travels really fast and it causes a lot of damage, especially at branch sites. And that's where you start to get the plaque and where plaque ruptures and leads to heart attack and stroke. So nitric oxide is doing two things. Number one, it's maintaining the pliability and the compliance of the blood vessels. But number two, it's allowing for the vasorelaxation. So all of us have a finite amount of blood, volume of blood. And so nitric oxide fixes the physics problem of high blood pressure, right? So we've got a finite amount of blood, 5 to 6 liters, 5.5 liters of blood pumping through our entire body. Now, if we can make nitric oxide, then it's dilating the blood vessels. So now we have that same volume of blood pumping through bigger pipes, right? And so simple laws of physics tells us that pressure is normal. Now, if we can't dilate the blood vessels, we've got that same volume of blood now pumping through constricted blood vessels, smaller pipes. And again, these are laws of physics, fundamental laws of physics that tells us that pressure has to go up. So if you lose nitric oxide, your blood pressure goes up, you get a lot of pulse wave, a lot of damage from that pulse wave. These overlapping pulse waves, we can look at that through different algorithms and assess a vascular score or endothelial function or arterial stiffness. But if we restore the production of nitric oxide, we change the pulse wave analysis, we maintain normal blood pressure. And that's a very important consideration because high blood pressure is the number one driver for cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer of men and women worldwide. And what we're finding is it's nitric oxide deficiency. High blood pressure is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So you have to treat it for root cause. And so if you fix the production of nitric oxide or you give nitric oxide, again, we fix the physics problem of high blood pressure.
Okay. Now, I was under the same impression, I think a lot of other people, which is a false, was that for ED, which is kind of a similar situation with nitric oxide, was that that's what Viagra and these other medications were doing, was they were basically creating nitric oxide in our system. And then that's what was allowing this to happen. But that's actually not how it's working.
Not how it's working at all. In fact, it's really disappointing because I see a lot of cardiologists, really smart cardiologists, and even urologists who think Viagra is a nitric oxide donor drug. And it's not. They don't understand basic mechanisms of biochemistry, enzymology, and they certainly don't understand pharmacology, the ones who say this. So these are called phosphodiesterase inhibitors. This is the Viagra, the Cialis, tadalafil, sildenafil. And so these drugs are working downstream of nitric oxide. In fact, these drugs, for them to work, it's dependent upon the patient's ability to produce nitric oxide. And if the patient can't produce nitric oxide, obviously they develop erectile dysfunction. But if you give them Viagra, and these drugs have been on the market since 1998. So we have about 27 years of clinical data on these PD5 inhibitors. And we know, very clinically validated, that 50% of the men that are prescribed these drugs for erectile dysfunction do not respond with better erections. And it's because those non-responders have such endothelial dysfunction that they're not making enough nitric oxide. So here's how the signaling works. You make nitric oxide, it activates an enzyme in the smooth muscle. That enzyme creates cyclic GMP, which is a second messenger. And then the phosphodiesterase enzymes degrade cyclic GMP. If you inhibit the enzyme that degrades cyclic GMP, like a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, then you prolong and potentiate the effects, that vasodilatory effect. But what we're finding is that if you can't make nitric oxide, those drugs can't work and they don't work. So again, that told us many, many years ago that erectile dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So we're finding if you have non-responders to Viagra, Cialis, and you give them our nitric oxide and now you amp up their nitric oxide levels, now those drugs actually work. So we're improving, those drug companies who sell those products should probably send us a royalty, send my company a royalty, because now we're making 50% of their customers long-term customers because they're a one-time purchase because they know that drug doesn't work for them. They incorporate our product. Now that drug works for them, they're going to continue to buy it. So we make their drugs better because we understand mechanistically how erections work, how vasodilation works, how sexual function works in men and women. And we can potentiate that. We can fix it. We can restore it by giving nitric oxide. And here's the other thing we're finding, that we find if people who are on 50, 100 milligrams of Viagra, they start taking our nitric oxide, they no longer need that. They certainly don't need that dose. So they can titrate down the dose, better safety profile, less side effects, and they get better erections and better sexual function.
Yeah.
So that's the benefit of being in the lab for 25 years, understanding biochemistry, enzymology, and physiology, and being able to address the root cause of many things that most pharmaceutical companies, most physicians don't even understand.
And one of the reasons, and I got this in the book because they've always said this, but I was like, I never really understood why. But you explain it in the book. Is this why we have the 4-hour rule? Is
Hey, the human body is designed to turn a signal on, but turn that signal off, right? So
yeah,
we've all seen the commercials. Please contact your physician or go to the ER if you have a 4-hour erection. And most men think that would be great. No, that's not
no,
necrosis, and your organ will die. I'm telling you. So here's what happens in erection: you get an increase in blood flows. You call that engorgement. But what it does is it prevents the outflow. And so after 4 hours, you start to lose oxygenation in that blood flow. So there's no perfusion of it. You get engorgement. The muscle of the penis start to expand, and it prevents the venous outflow. And that's why you can get an erection and you can sustain an erection. But if you inhibit the enzyme that breaks down cyclic GMP, that once climaxed, it allows for the blood vessels to no longer to constrict back and to allow outflow, then you run out of oxygen, the tissue becomes ischemic, in 4 hours it's necrotic, and you will never get an erection again because now you have dead tissue, dysfunctional tissue. It leads to muscular atrophy, it leads to the inability to dilate blood vessels anymore. So that's a very serious side effect that shouldn't be ignored.
yeah. Again, I never really took it that serious before, but now, yeah, I'm paying attention. If it, and yeah. Anyway, okay. So inside the body, basically, there are two ways, effectively, for us to get nitric oxide.
Yep.
And so, if we have a deficiency, it's probably both of these that are failing, because one will compensate for the other, which is, in the Yada you'd said in the book, we have a lot of redundant systems. So if something's not working, there's probably another system in there.
Right.
You've identified at least two right now that will do this. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so one we've talked about a little bit, this enzyme that's found in the lining of the blood vessels, the nitric oxide synthase enzyme takes L-arginine, which is a semi-essential amino acid, and converts it to nitric oxide gas. And this is a very complex 5-electron multi-step oxidation reaction. And so it's the dysfunction of that enzyme that leads to nitric oxide deficiency, and we call that endothelial dysfunction. And you can have some degree of endothelial dysfunction, but if you eat the right diet, you can compensate for that and allow for this alternative compensatory source of nitric oxide. And that's from, eating green leafy vegetables where we consume inorganic nitrate, that then the bacteria that live in the crypts of the tongue and on our body and in our gut to some extent can metabolize that into nitrite and nitric oxide gas. But that system requires, number one, the sufficient amount of nitrate in the diet. It requires the presence of very specific communities of bacteria, and it requires stomach acid. And so, when you start to understand the steps that are required for this nitric oxide production, and then start to understand that most Americans aren't getting enough vegetables in their diet, 2 out of 3 Americans use antiseptic mouthwash every day. 73% of the municipalities have fluoride in their drinking water, which kills the bacteria in the pipes, in the water, in your body, in your mouth. And then, 150 million prescriptions written for antacids every year. And another, 30, 40% are using over-the-counter antacids. Most Americans are unable to produce any nitric oxide through this enterosalivary dietary circuit. So they have no compensatory mechanism. And if they develop endothelial dysfunction, they become completely nitric oxide deficient. They get erectile dysfunction, they get high blood pressure, they get metabolic disease, diabetes, they can't exercise, they develop mild cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's, when the basic problem is a loss of nitric oxide.
Now, in the foods, you said leafy greens and some root vegetables, and you mentioned beets. And you made a statement in there, okay, so I have to ask this question. You said you hate beets, but beyond that, beets are the third least favorite vegetable out there. I have to ask, who got number 1 and number 2 of the least favorite vegetable?
I've asked that same question, and I don't know the answer. but they got to be pretty bad if they're deep beets.
Yeah, I'm like, I gotta know what those are because, well, I actually like beets, but
Yeah, it could be
I
kale.
know
I
that
mean,
that's
kale's pretty
that's
awful.
not normal. I've got a lot of not normal things about foods I like, but
Yeah,
yeah, so I'll have to look that up. I got to figure that one out because now you've created a mystery in my head I've got to solve. But the
yeah,
reality is that, food should and could be the easiest way for us to manage this, but we've got to have the right bacteria in our mouth, and we're doing a lot of things to clean up that bacteria.
right.
And then we've also got to have the stomach acid, which a lot of people, as you said, are on some form of medication to tap that down because they've got other situations going on. So it's a real struggle. Even if we ate more leafy greens and forced ourselves to eat beets, or we still might not get what we need because our body isn't prepared to do that work.
Right. Yeah, there's problems in every step in that pathway. So in 2015, we did a survey around the U.S. We went to 5 cities and we just took vegetables off the shelf because the question for me is if we can use diet as a way to enhance nitric oxide production, can we change the dietary guidelines? Can we make very simple recommendations? Say, okay, you should eat this much celery on a daily basis, or this much lettuce, spinach, kale, beets, for example, and that will give you enough capacity. So then, if we get your body primed, you can make nitric oxide and normalize your blood pressure and overcome a lot of diseases through diet, a dietary intervention alone. And so the question was, how much spinach, arugula, cabbage would you need to eat, celery would you need to eat to get that threshold to produce nitric oxide? And what we found was it depends on where you live because the nitrate in celery in Dallas is 50 to 60 times higher than the nitrate bought in New York versus Chicago or Raleigh or Los Angeles. And then conventionally grown vegetables have more than organically grown vegetables because to get an organic label, you can't add nitrogen to the soil. So without nitrogen, you get no nitrate. The plants can't assimilate it, so there's less nitrate found in organically grown vegetables. So the purpose of that study, really the conclusion of that study, there's no way in hell we can ever make recommendations to say, if you eat this much celery or spinach or lettuce, you're going to get this much nitrate and that's going to be sufficient for nitric oxide. Because it depends upon the vegetable you're eating, where you buy it, if it's conventional or if it's organic. So there's no way. So diet can provide a source of nitric oxide, but there's no way to predict it or even know or make recommendations on it.
But this is one of the reasons why I like the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet and those
Sure.
types of things actually can help improve if you do have the right, biome in your mouth and you do have the stomach acid. You may notice an improvement in your blood pressure. You may notice an improvement in cardiovascular symptoms if you change your diet and eat more vegetables. So I think it's still worth giving it a go. You don't have to force yourself to eat beets, but give it a go and try to eat a little bit more. But this also kind of speaks to the reason a lot of those other types of NO supplements aren't as effective because they don't really take into account your capacity to actually create nitric oxide.
No, that's exactly right. So when I started in this field in the late 90s, after the Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998, and kind of the signaling mechanism had been elucidated, there were dozens, probably hundreds of companies that started launching nitric oxide products. And they were mainly L-arginine based to give, high dose L-arginine. But what we quickly found out was that your body's never out of arginine, right? We have in the cell 20 to 40 times more arginine than what's needed to saturate the binding site of the enzyme to make nitric oxide. So nitric oxide deficiency is never an arginine deficiency. It's the function of the enzyme. So giving arginine doesn't fix the underlying problem in people who are nitric oxide deficient. Number two, the body always responds to what it's given. So if you administer high dose L-arginine, you get an upregulation of arginase, which then diverts it away from nitric oxide production and creates ornithine and urea, and you just excrete it out of the kidneys and the urine. So if you don't know what you're doing biochemically, you can actually do more harm. In fact, this was demonstrated in a couple of randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials using arginine supplements in people who had just suffered a heart attack to try to improve their nitric oxide production, preserve ejection fraction, and improve mortality and morbidity in post-infarct patients. And in that 2006 study, they found that giving arginine killed more people than the placebo in people who just had a heart attack. So they actually stopped the clinical trial halfway through because it was deemed unethical to give arginine to people who just had a heart attack. That threw the field kind of on its head. And then a couple of years later, they repeated that same study in patients with peripheral artery disease. Again, trying to improve nitric oxide production to dilate the peripheral arteries to overcome the ischemia and the intermittent claudication. And they got the same results. L-arginine made patients worse. Claudication got worse. Symptoms got worse. The last paragraph of that study was L-arginine should not be given to people with peripheral artery disease. So L-arginine doesn't work. It can't work. And companies selling arginine-based products just don't understand the biochemistry. And then, several years down the line, people started throwing citrulline in there. Well, citrulline is a byproduct of nitric oxide. So you can easily spot the companies who are selling products who don't understand the science. If they've got arginine or citrulline in their product, then they're just ignorant. And ignorance isn't a bad thing, right? It's just a lack of knowledge. But that's why we're here. We can cure ignorance. Yeah. We can't cure stupidity. And stupidity is knowing the information and still refusing to accept it.
I'm not going to go with ignorant. I think they know exactly what they're doing. But they can show a process. There's a process. And so if there's a process and this is a precursor or the actual item of the process, the theory sounds pretty good. Like, yeah, if you're missing this and you're deficient in this, having this is going to make things better, but that's not actually the mechanism of how it's working. And not going to get you where you want to go. So,
and then the other thing is, after 2012, beets hit the market. As you mentioned, beets were popular. It's a performance enhancing vegetable. It's a hero vegetable. And then, so all these companies started, selling beet products. And, I developed interest in that because there was a lot of good clinical data coming out showing that if you had a standardized amount of nitrate in a beetroot product, then some people got an improvement in exercise performance. But most of these companies are out there buying the cheapest beet powder on the market, putting it in a canister and selling it. They're selling hundreds of millions of dollars of a beet product that's a dead beet. It does not work. I've tested it. We verified. In fact, we use these as placebos. We use commercially available beet products that are sold on the market today as placebos in clinical trials because they're perfect placebos for nitric oxide. It's a dead beet. It has no nitrate, no nitrite, doesn't activate nitric oxide production at all. It's a perfect placebo. And yet consumers are out there buying these products every day. You see them on TV, getting people. Obviously, they're making money because they're spending a lot of money on advertising. And so it's fraud. It's at the end of the day, it's deceptive marketing and it's fraudulent.
Okay, well, you have a lozenge that you sell. It's a little different. Can we talk a little bit about what makes yours different?
Yeah, so you pointed to it. So this, again, nitric oxide is a gas, right? And so there's not a pill you can swallow. You can't take it in a capsule. So we have to deliver this gas. So I developed what's called a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. So as soon as I put this lozenge in my mouth, this matrix starts to fall apart and it's producing nitric oxide gas. So I've got a nitric oxide gas phase analyzer and I can detect nitric oxide coming out of my mouth as soon as I put it. In fact, just the moisture on my fingertips. As soon as I touch it, it starts to activate it and I can produce nitric oxide. So again, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we do it for you. We're providing nitric oxide gas. And then number two, we've talked a little bit about the oral microbiome. Because this is producing nitrogen byproducts and providing nitrate to wake up these nitrate-reducing bacteria, we're completely restoring the oral microbiome from a non-healthy to a healthy nitric oxide-producing microbiome. And then the other thing we're doing is we're improving the function of the enzyme because we understand what leads to endothelial dysfunction and the enzymology of the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. We put components in there that prevent its uncoupling. So now we see an improvement in the body's ability to make nitric oxide on its own. And the beauty of this is it's not like testosterone, right? So if you take testosterone, it prevents endogenous production, right? So you get testicular atrophy, and now your body becomes dependent upon exogenous testosterone. I didn't want to do that. It's a great financial model because people have to keep buying my product. I make them dependent on it. But I want to fix the reason they can't make nitric oxide. I want to restore the function of the enzyme. I know how to do that. I want to restore the function and the communities of the bacteria that are responsible for the production of nitric oxide. And this lozenge does it all. If your body can't make it, we do it for you, and we fix the reason your body can't make it through both pathways. And that's the difference. And nobody else can do that. Nobody else does that. And that's the challenge I have every day, is waking up and, how do I differentiate my science, my product technology from all the other companies out there who are certainly outspending me, out advertising me. But, my only objective is to educate the masses so they understand what nitric oxide is, so they can make informed, educated decisions on what products work and what products are best for them.
Now, I didn't find this in the book. I did read the book, but I didn't find this particular thing in the book. When we talk about the bacteria in the mouth, obviously stomach acid, if you can get off of the inhibitors and
Yep.
and all the other stuff, if you stop that, that's going to help pretty much immediately. But with regards to the bacteria, beyond not drinking fluoride water, not using the types of mouthwash that are killing germs,
Yep.
we move away from those things. What foods are there foods we should be eating, or things we should be doing to help cultivate that community? Because it seems to me that if something like this, if we're in there, this is going to improve the viability of those bacteria, but we got to make sure those are there. Because if you've ever been on an antibiotic or you're doing these other things, you may have wiped out the vast majority of them, and the time to come back could be a little bit longer. But is there something we can do to enhance what should we be eating, or what should we be taking to make that problem go away?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. And it's not just what you're eating, but it's what you're not eating. So number one, green leafy vegetables are good. I mean, nitrate is what we call kind of a prebiotic. So these are facultative anaerobic bacteria that if oxygen's around, they can use oxygen. If it's not around, they can respire on nitrogen, particularly nitrate. But the problem is sugar, right? When we eat sugar food, high glycemic carbohydrates and really sugary substances, that completely changes the oral microbiome. It decreases the pH. It allows for an environment for, cavity-causing, caries-causing bacteria to take resident. And sugar is sticky, right? And it sticks to enzymes, it sticks to proteins and locks them into a conformational state. So anything that leads to an increase in blood sugar is shutting down nitric oxide production from both pathways. It's locking up the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels, and it's completely changing the microbiome in the mouth. So sugar's the enemy. Sugar's poison. Sugar's the toxin. We have to eliminate sugar. And even supplements and deliveries that contain sugar and seed oils, for example. And then the other big contributor are mouth breathers. The mouth is for speaking. It's not for breathing. And so when we sleep, we're designed to have a closed mouth, and we breathe in through our nasals. And there's two reasons for this, two primary reasons. Number one, when we do nasal breathing, that activates nitric oxide production in the upper sinuses and in the epithelium. When we generate nitric oxide, it's delivered into the lower airways. It matches ventilation to perfusion, improves oxygen uptake and oxygen delivery. And that's why deep breathing can lower blood pressure. If you mouth breathe, if you're a mouth breather, then you're bypassing the nitric oxide in the upper airway and the sinuses, and you're completely destroying nitric oxide through the oral microbiome, because now you're fully oxygenating the oral cavity, leading to a decrease in salivary pH, completely changing the composition of the microbiome on the gingival tissue, in the crypts of the tongue, and it completely shuts down nitric oxide production. And you develop sleep apnea, you become hypoxic, you don't heal, you don't rest, you don't mobilize stem cells, and you get old fast, and you get disease. So I'm a big believer and advocate of mouth taping, provided you've got an unobstructed airway to where you can breathe through your nose. But that requires a visit to an airway specialist, a dentist, or an ENT to make sure that you actually have an unobstructed airway, because it's a really bad idea to tape your mouth if you've got an obstructed airway.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. Dr. Bryan, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
I think it's individualized. It's hard to prescribe a one-size-fits-all, but here's what works for me, and I think can work for most people. Number one, every day I do an 18-hour fast. The data on intermittent fasting is pretty phenomenal, right? You completely change your metabolism. You become more metabolically fit. So I eat my last meal by 6. I don't eat till 12 the next day. Number one. And then I eliminate sugar and simple carbohydrates. Anything that leads to a spike in blood sugar, I typically avoid it. And then I eat, a lot of protein, red meat, a lot of protein, good fats, limited carbs. And then I exercise every day of my life, no matter where I am in the world. I'm on an airplane, every week for the past 10 or 15 years. I'm all over the world, but no matter where I am, what I do, I wake up and I exercise every day. And I think that's a pretty simple recipe that can be cost savings. And, it's not expensive. I mean, it's cost savings to do intermittent fasting because you're not buying a lot of foods, particularly junk food. Eating good quality meals and good quality protein with good fats isn't that more expensive. And exercise is free. And that works because it's diet and exercise and lifestyle has been shown for hundreds of years to treat, prevent, cure, and even reverse any disease, pretty much any disease. So that's a very simple recipe, but getting those are the top 3 for sure. But then I do micronutrient analysis. I figure out what my body's missing. I supplement. I do targeted supplementation. And I take my nitric oxide product every day, not because I need it, it's because I don't want to need it.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. If someone wanted to learn more about you or learn about your book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, or the product, where would you like for me to send them?
I'm less interested in selling product and more interested in education and awareness. And so I send people to my YouTube channel because there we're trying to provide proper science, real information based on real data so people can become educated and informed. So YouTube is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan Nitric Oxide. You can find the book here at nathansbook.com or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, really anywhere books are sold. And then, we answer a lot of questions and solve a lot of problems, and people want to know, okay, I have this problem. What's the solution? And they can find our products at n1o1.com. That's the letter N, number 1, letter O, number 1.com. And then I'm on social media, Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm searchable.
All right, good. So, Dr. Bryan, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you, Allan. It's been a great pleasure being with you, and I hope your audience gets something out of this.
I'm sure they will. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we will discuss the first principles of starting or restarting a fitness program. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.